to tell you a little bit about our speaker tonight. A lot of the people in this chapter who founded this chapter have worked with Linda for many years on various projects, and she is our guru and our mentor, and she's the person we go to with questions, and she's incredibly knowledgeable. She has a PhD in ecology from Rutgers. And while she was working on that, she studied the effects of deer on forest understories, which is something that we all think about and need to know about as much as possible. She has created native plant wildlife habitat on her own properties, both in New Jersey and New York, over the course of 20 years. For quite a long time, she was director of land stewardship at the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference, where she created and maintained their native plant gardens up in Mahwah, which are quite beautiful. She conducted restoration projects at sites in New York and New Jersey state parks. And she also ran the Trail Conference's Invasive Strike Force volunteer program, where over 400 volunteers went out and surveyed more than 1,500 miles of hiking trails for invasives. This is a really serious long-term research study and a very important one. In 2022, Linda founded the nonprofit Wildwoods Restoration Project, which she's going to tell us about tonight. The mission of the project is to restore the health and diversity of our Hudson Valley forests with local native plants grown by volunteers, and to inspire a passion for continued stewardship. And I think that's exactly what Linda's going to do tonight. So welcome, Linda, and we're looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you, Elaine. Thanks, everybody, for having me tonight. I also want to just mention, Elaine, in case you didn't notice, someone mentioned the chat may be disabled, so you might want to check into that while I'm speaking. So I'm so glad to see the attendance tonight. It's a great turnout for a chapter meeting. And I hope you guys will all enjoy what I'm going to be talking about. My name is Linda Rohleder. As Elaine mentioned, I've put my contact information up here at the bottom of the slide, as well as the URL for our website. And as she mentioned, I started Wildwoods Restoration Project early last year, and I'm going to mostly be talking about that tonight, but also a lot of the concepts that we're dealing with and everything that goes into it. So what I want to start with first is why. Why are we doing this? And, you know, those of you that live in New Jersey, even throughout the Northeast, you notice that a lot of our forests look like this. If you don't have a forest that looks similar to this, congratulations, you might actually have a fairly nice piece, or you might also have one that's highly invaded with invasive shrubs. But what we're seeing here in most of our forests is very bare understory. We see a lot of canopy trees and not much below that. This is not a healthy forest. It's missing several layers of habitat. It's missing the smaller trees, the shrub layer, the herbaceous layer. So we are looking at this. A whole generation is growing up thinking that this is what forests look like. But this is not a healthy forest. This is not the kind of forest that we really want. Why do they look like this? Well, there's multiple reasons. There's some, major ones. Deer, the overpopulation of deer eating plants in the understory sort of wiped out a lot of the individuals that are in the forest. A lot of pressure from deer, and I'm sure many of you have experienced this even in your own yards with deer eating things that you try to plant. We also have issues with invasive species, plants and insects and fungi and diseases. Those things can really decimate our forests. We've seen things come through that wiped out the American chestnut, essentially the elm trees, the hemlocks. So, these two things are really devastating to a big aspect of our forest. And then past land use. If the forest was previously farmed, and most of the forests we have in this area have been completely clear cut in the past. And what we're looking at is considered second growth or even third growth forest. And what happens when you completely cut all the trees from an area and then allow it to regrow, you get a lot of fast growing trees that grow up really fast and they shade the ground, and it inhibits the understory plants from getting established or getting reestablished. Further, if that land had been farmed after it was cut, the farming practices can have eliminated the seeds from the seed bank, from the soil that would have been needed to come, for those species to come back, or it could have destroyed the root systems of species that might be able to resprout from roots. So those factors have resulted in this kind of forest that we are seeing a lot in the Northeast today. So how do we get, what should we have? Well, we should have a forest that looks like this. You should not be able to see through the forest. It should be filled with various layers, with shrubs and small trees and ferns and herbaceous plants and mosses and fungi and lichens. So there's a lot of various biodiversity here. Most of the biodiversity in the forest is encompassed in those understory layers. There's only maybe a dozen tree species that you would have in the canopy, if that. Most of the biodiversity is in those lower layers. But also there's a lot of habitat that's in these layers. The vertical habitat, for birds to nest, for them to take cover, for insects to hide and live, and spiders to build their webs, and various organisms to live. So without those layers, we're missing a lot of habitat. So how do we get those layers back? Well, we have to control deer. We have to remove invasives. And, I'm going to gloss over those things. Those are both talks in and of themselves. Once we do that, what do we just sit back and watch? Will it come back? Most of the time, it won't come back because of those factors that I talked about. Mostly that the former land use has eliminated the seed source or the roots that would be there that would come back. But also, if you look around the neighboring forest, where are the plants that are going to produce the seed that is coming in to get established? Well, most of them have been eaten by deer in the surrounding forest. So even if we control deer, even if we remove invasives, we may not get our understory back unless we do something. Okay. So that's where we come in. That's what the idea behind Wildwoods Restoration Project is. It is to organize volunteers to grow the plants that we need to restore those layers in our forest understories. And by doing that, to inspire the sense of stewardship in the volunteers for what we're doing, so that they can actually participate in the stewardship and the restoration of our forests. So one of the key things about our mission is we're using local native plants, and that we're having those plants grown by volunteers. So I'm going to talk a lot more about what this means. And before I go too far, I'm talking about Hudson Valley here, but you'll see on our maps that even though we sort of focus on the Hudson Valley, we do go into North Jersey as well. And that's why I'm happy to be speaking to the Bergen-Passaic chapter of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. So, just because it says Hudson Valley, don't think that you're excluded. We are covering North Jersey as well. So what we're doing is we're partnering with parks. We support parks efforts, whether it's through park staff or volunteer work that's being done in parks. We support parks efforts to restore their woods. We all know that parks don't have enough funding, and that funding is getting cut often. They don't have enough funding to actually do restoration that they might want to do. They're doing well if they do manage to control deer and to remove invasives. So we want to reward them for managing and doing that stuff by bringing them restoration projects. And we go out with the biologists for, this is Farnstock State Park, which is Putnam County, New York. We help with the plantings. We meet with the land managers to plan and design these restoration projects that we work on. So our restoration principles that we use. So I mentioned local native seeds. So we're using local ecotype native seeds and plants, and I'll explain what that is in just a minute. We also want to understand the natural community that should be there. And we can do that by looking at the canopy trees that are overhead and comparing those to, and the growing conditions, you know, dry, wet, sun, shade, that kind of thing. We can compare that to known defined vegetation communities and to determine what the native community should be in that place so that we can restore the right plants. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, the right plant in the right place. That's what we're looking to do. Put the right plant in the right place so that we have the best chance of success. In coordination with this, we are making sure to monitor our results and so that we can adapt what we're doing. So we do pre-data collection before we do a restoration project. We go out and we do vegetation surveys and measure the percent cover of all the different species that are there, so that after we do plantings and over time, we can go back and measure again in the same way and see whether we've increased the biodiversity, whether the populations of the plants that are there are increasing, and we can monitor how we're doing and adjust if necessary. So what does local ecotype mean? It's basically population or subspecies that is adapted to local environmental conditions. And sort of the implication here is that these individuals in this population, that if they were adapted to those local conditions, they're going to have reproduced better than other individuals. So that if you are taking a seed from those populations and putting it in the same environmental conditions, they're going to have the best chance of success. And what I like to use as my sort of poster child example here is red maple. Red maple, it has a range that goes all the way up into Canada, Maine, all the way down to Florida. And so that's one species, red maple, but and it can survive in all of these different conditions. But if you took seed from Florida and moved it up and tried to grow it in Maine, you probably would not have as much success with that as you would as if you took seed from Maine and tried to grow it in Maine, because the Florida population is adapted to the warm, humid, long growing conditions of Florida and not adapted to cold winters. Whereas in Maine, the genetics of the red maples that live in Maine are adapted to the cold winters and the short growing conditions there. So they will be better able to survive. So that's the idea behind local ecotype, is getting those genetics that are adapted to the local conditions. But that doesn't take into account necessarily the hardiness zones. So hardiness zones, if you're a gardener, you've heard about this. This has to do with climate, right? Climate is a controller, how species can survive a cold winter or the lowest temperatures that year. So it has to do with low temperature, what the average low and the growing degree days. So what we're looking at in our area, North Jersey and the Hudson Valley, New York, we're looking at sort of zone 6A, 6B, this area. So, for example, even though we might get seed from, you know, a little bit further away, it's a little bit different climatic conditions. So we generally want to stay within the hardiness zone that we're in as well. And I know all of you are thinking about climate change. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the talk. So we'll talk about how that might play into hardiness zones. So the other thing that we look at is, so hardiness zones deal with climate. Ecoregions deal with the soils conditions, and the soils come from the underlying bedrock, the geology of the rocks that are in that area. And what you will see is that we have ecoregions. These ecoregions have been defined by the EPA, and there's a reference here. Omernick is the so there are four levels of ecoregions. There's ecoregion level 1, which is really broad, you know, like we're eastern deciduous forest. Level 2 cuts it down a little bit further. And this is level 3 that I'm showing here. And then there's a level 4, which is even further breakdowns within these ecoregions. We're primarily looking with Wildwoods Restoration Project, we're primarily looking at this level 3 ecoregion, but with a glance towards the level 4s. So if you see, this is the Hudson Valley right here. This is North Jersey. You'll see that we're really complex here with a lot of different ecoregions that sort of run through there, even though we're in the same USDA hardiness zone. We've got about 4 different ecoregions that run through this area. And so you sort of need to combine that. We're looking at ecoregion 58, which is the Northern Highlands. And we're looking at ecoregion 59, which is the Northeast Coastal Zone. This is the dark pink area. The lighter pink area is the Ridge and Valley. Starts up here in western Orange County, New York, and goes down through the Delaware Water Gap into Pennsylvania. And then ecoregion 64, which is where Bergen County is. This is the northern Piedmont. That includes Rockland County, goes down through sort of north central New Jersey down into Pennsylvania. So we're trying to maintain fidelity of the plants, the seeds that we collect and the plants that we grow to these ecoregions, as well as overlaying the USDA hardiness zone. So you'll notice, for example, ecoregion 58 goes way up into Canada, but there's several different hardiness zones in that span. We're keeping within our hardiness zone within ecoregion 58, for example. Okay, so then we look at the plant assemblages by community. And I don't know if the URLs have been good. The URLs are in the chat. Okay, so you guys don't have to try to copy these URLs down. They're in the chat. So you can pick them up there, and we'll probably repost those at the end as well, so you can have another chance to pull them out. So what these are the natural heritage programs. Each state has a natural heritage program, and they've gone through and they've defined the vegetation communities in each state. What you do is you look at your overstory trees and any understory plants that are native that you can find in your target restoration area, and look for the ecological community that most closely matches that you have on the ground. And that will give you a guide, a plant palette of plants that you can assume will pretty much go well in that community, and guide for you what to restore in the community. And if you're not in New York or New Jersey, just look at your state's natural heritage program and look for the ecological community definitions. So the other thing is we practice responsible seed collection. So we're collecting local seed so that we can have those local ecotypes and the local genetics. And we want to do that responsibly. So we've modeled our program after the Bureau of Land Management's Seeds of Success program. Now, the Bureau of Land Management is a very large landholder in the Western US, and they are applying this program to do restoration on those lands. They don't hold so much land in the Northeast, so they're not really involved that much in this region. But we based our program on their protocols for seed collection. And those protocols require us to find substantial populations that are healthy to collect seed from. We don't want populations that are sick or seem to have a disease, and we don't want to collect from very small populations because we could actually damage that population's survivability by taking too much of its seed if we collect from it. So we want something that has a lot of individuals and that seems to be healthy and reproducing. So it needs to be reproducing so that we can collect seed. So we're looking for something that's flowering or already has produced some seed. We always obtain a permit from the landowner to do seed collection. And if you do your own seed collection, you should also do this as well. Make sure to obtain a permit or permission from the landowner. It could be simply an email that says, yes, you can collect seed. But it's always very good practice to do that. We collect no more than 20% of available seed, and often much less than that. So the Seeds of Success protocol has set 20% as the guideline. Other groups do 10% of the available seed. So that's just to make sure that you're not taking too much. It leaves enough for the population to repopulate itself, but it also leaves enough for the animals that use that seed. So we also make sure to collect from individuals throughout the population so that when you're collecting seed, you want to make sure that you get a wide range of genetic diversity. You, for example, don't want to collect all of your seed from one plant within the population. You want to take a little bit from a bunch of different individuals to get the maximum amount of genetic diversity and to ensure that genetic diversity is represented. And that's why if you've got some taller plants and some shorter plants, plants that are on the edge of the population or in the middle of the population, you want all of them to be represented in your collection. So you should make sure to collect just a little bit from a random sample throughout the population. And again, no more than 20% of the available seed. I'll talk a little bit more about making sure you've got genetic diversity too a little bit later. So one of the things that we really want to do by collecting and growing local native seed is to preserve the genetics of those populations that exist in our area. If you think about it, more and more natural areas are getting developed, they're getting mowed down, or the understory is being eaten by deer, so the plants aren't reproducing as much. So we want to preserve those genetics while we still can. So that's one of the reasons to collect and then produce it and spread it to local areas so that genetic diversity can be preserved. This URL is also in the ones that are posted in the chat.
Linda, I want to interrupt
Yes.
for 1 second. The chat
Sure.
is disabled. We can't figure out why it's disabled. We will put the links all in the Q&A at the end. And if you email us at bergenpassaic@npsnj.org, we will send you all of the links. Okay, I think that's all we can do. I'm sorry about that. We're trying to figure it out, but we can't seem to.
Okay. All right.
All right.
And you are recording this presentation too, right? So they would be able to watch it.
Yes, it's being recorded.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about provenance. So provenance, if you're interested in the art world, you hear people talking about provenance of art pieces, right? It's the place of origin of something and the history of ownership of that object, so that you can sort of prove where it originally came from and that it has a whole chain of ownership and documentation associated with it. So one of the things that we're doing, we're collecting local native seed. We are keeping the provenance of that seed. Where was it collected? What were the environmental conditions there? The GPS coordinates. And as we grow that seed into plants, we keep that information associated with the plants so that when it goes into a restoration site at a partner park or preserve, we can tell them exactly where all of those plants came from. And keeping provenance is really important because it may play into future decisions. Once you mix up the provenance or muddy it, mix it with various different sources, and you can't tell where it came from anymore, then you also have a problem understanding why your restoration might have not been as successful as you expected. You may have used seed that was inappropriate for that place because it, either came from a very distant geography, a different habitat, so by keeping provenance, it can also inform how you do restoration work. So that's one thing we're doing as we're going through, keeping that provenance associated with our seeds and our plants. So we also are making sure to store our seeds in in the best way possible to ensure their longevity. So when we have excess seed that we aren't going to grow for the next year, we deposit it in the local Mid-Atlantic Seed Bank, which is in Staten Island at Greenbelt Native Plant Center. Right now is where it's housed. And this is a picture. We went to visit our seeds, say hi to our seeds, see where they were living. So it's a climate controlled room where the seeds are stored, and it gives them the best chance for longevity. Now, you could also store these seeds in your refrigerator. You just want to control humidity, control temperature. And then some seeds also can't be stored. These are called recalcitrant seeds. They're seeds that have to be sown right away because in nature, the plant is expecting that seed to drop into the soil and maybe start germinating or germinate soon. And it does not do well if it dries out. So it's hard to store those kind of seeds. Some examples, many wetland plants don't like to dry out. They're expecting to be in a wetland. For example, willows, they can't be stored. Some spring ephemerals, for example, bloodroot has an elaiosome on it, which is a fat body that ants use, and they come take it away and eat the elaiosome and bury the seed in their midden. So they don't store well. Oaks and hickories and maples, those seeds don't store well. They need to be planted right away. It's not something you would think of. You think probably, oak is in a really hard shell. Hickory nut, acorn, you should be able to store that, but no, they don't really do well if they dry out. So I put this URL here on the bottom, wildplantsfromseed.com. It's a great resource for which seeds can be stored, which can't be, and how to actually grow from seed. And it's a Canadian site, but most of our Northeast plants are included in that website. So I recommend you take a look at that if you're interested. The other thing we're doing, for these, especially for these recalcitrant seeds, this is another thing that can be done, is to do a founder plot or a foundation plot. And basically these are planted beds of ecotype plants that can be tended. So that means they can be watered and weeded, and then used as living seed sources so that you can harvest seed from them. If you keep your planting pure with its provenance, then that all the seed that you collect from it can be considered with that provenance. There's many factors that go into this, such as making sure that you don't have a nearby population that can cross-pollinate, and that can be an issue in some cases. But this is one way that we can increase the amount of seed that we have that comes from a local genetic source by doing these planting beds. So this is at Greenbelt Native Plant Center, some of their founder plots there. And this is just one way to do it with the landscape fabric. It doesn't have to have that be done that way. So if you volunteer for us with a Wildwoods Restoration Project, I'm going to start to work into now how you can be a part of our group. You can scout for populations. So we're looking populations that we can collect seed from. So we're looking for accessible populations that are in forests, because we're interested in the forest understory. And the populations need to be accessible because often you're going to need to go back multiple times to check and see if the seed is ready to collect. So if you have to hike 2 miles in just to check and see if it's ready, it's not that feasible to do. So unless you love to hike and you want a reason to hike those 2 miles, that's perfectly fine too. But looking for accessible populations. Okay, so we're looking for populations that are a good size. There's a good number of individuals, that it's healthy, that they're reproducing. As I mentioned before, they have either flowers or they're producing seed. And then we ask you to take a photo of the plant and of the population and use iNaturalist.org or iNaturalist app and join our project, Wildwoods Restoration Populations, and submit your observations to the project. So we can use a lot of help finding appropriate populations to collect from. Now, just because you've identified a population, it doesn't necessarily mean we can get permission to collect from or that we're going to collect from it, but it really helps to have a lot of eyes out there looking and reporting and recording this for us to figure out where we can collect from. And we will reach out to the owners and get permissions, unless it's private property and you know the people and you can help us with that. So we do seed collection and sowing. So we organize volunteers to do this. Volunteers are involved in collecting. If you are interested in doing collection, there's training that you have to go through, and you have to do data collection. You have to follow our data collection protocols and submit the data collection with the seed that you collect. So that's something that there's a smaller set of volunteers that are doing that. We also have volunteer work days where we get together and we teach you how to clean the seed and different types of seed and how to sow the seed and different types of sowing. And then we sow seed for the organization to grow plants for the following year. And we also have potting up work days where we get together and we pot up the little seedlings into these 2.5-inch pots. So it's 2.5-inch on the side, measured on the side of the lip. I sort of liken it to a quilting bee. We sit around and we do work, but we chat and we have a good time. We have our volunteer potting up work day. Work days are late May to early July. We're going to have them throughout the Lower Hudson Valley. We are portable. We bring the supplies, the soil, the bins, the pots, the plants to our partner organization, and so that their local volunteers can participate and grow plants for their restoration projects. So this is one that was at Black Rock Forest. This was one at Hudson Highlands Land Trust in Putnam County. And then volunteers grow plants at home. So from the potting up work days, we end up with a flat. This is the size of a flat. You see them holding. That's 32 plants in there, 32 little 2.5-inch pots. They take that flat home and grow it at home June until September. Now you don't have to attend a potting up work day in order to grow plants for us. We met a bunch of our New Jersey volunteers at a parking lot of a big box store and gave them their plants in June. And then we met them there in early September to take them back. So yeah, we will make arrangements to do things like that. Or you can pick them up from us at one of our other locations where we have potting up work days. We can make arrangements. So if you can't make the particular potting up workday that's closest to you, we can make arrangements to get you a flat to grow. If you're an experienced grower, you may get multiple flats like these folks did. So they got to grow multiple flats for us. And by and large, most of our volunteers were very successful last year. I think above 80%, probably close to 90% success rate, which is fabulous because if you guys remember, last year we had like this 2-month-long drought and it was pretty horrible. So everyone had to water their plants like, every day, twice a day, it was really touch and go sometimes. So, it was really a great job. Also, you can see that flat's not that big. So you don't need a lot of space to participate. In fact, we had two volunteers who grew their plants on their apartment balconies. So you can do this as long as you have a little bit of sun, and you don't have to have a lot of sun because remember, these are forest understory plants. So they are expecting to be a little bit shaded. And the big bonus is if you grow plants for us, you can earn free plants. If we have our volunteers earn about 20% of what they grow. So if they grow 32 plants, they earn about 6 plants. And they don't have to take plants from the ones they grew if it's not appropriate for their yards. We grow other plants that are appropriate for sun conditions, even though we don't use those for our forest restoration. So we grow a selection that volunteers can use as their reward plants. So you're successful, you earn some plants for yourself. And then we have volunteer work days where we plant our plants in restoration projects. So the sites are in local parks and preserves. These work days will happen in September and October. And you can see we're planting the little pots in the fall. We love to do fall plantings. We feel like we're more successful with fall plantings. And we use this auger. It's a bulb planting auger. You can see it a little bit better here in this photo. And so it just makes a small hole, really easy to do. Even the kids can do it. This little boy is 6 years old. He had no problem drilling the hole and planting his plants. That's his mom there helping. So anybody can be involved in this. And just some accomplishments. So if you remember, Elaine said at the beginning, I founded this organization in 2022. So that was the beginning of last year. So our stats are from 1 year, from last year. So we had 65 volunteers, donated over 1,000 hours, dollar equivalent over $41,000 worth of time and effort into this. We grew over 3,000 plants and planted 1,700 of them. And this little asterisk here, what happened to the rest of them? Well, some of them are being held in pots to grow bigger for this year. And some of them were planted in founder plots. And some of them were taken as rewards for the volunteers. So that they're all accounted for. We had 5 restoration sites. We made 136 seed collections of 78 different species across all 4 of our ecoregions. And then we partnered with Black Rock Forest, which is Orange County, New York, Hudson Highlands Land Trust in Putnam County, New York State Parks in Westchester County and in the Bronx County, and Westchester County Parks as well. We do have, I'm going to tell you a little bit in a minute about our future projects. But if you volunteer with us, I can guarantee you a good experience. Actually, maybe I shouldn't do that. I'm jinxed myself, knock on wood. 98% of our volunteers were inspired to continue stewardship. 97 would volunteer again, and 91 said they felt like they had made a difference. And that's after 1 year, that they felt like they had really made a difference. So we hope that you will join us, you will volunteer for us, and I will give you the link at the end of the presentation. We also do plant rescues. So with the permission of the property owner, areas that are designated for development or another impact, we will come in and dig up plants that we feel that we can rescue. We rescued 130 plants so far: Jack in the Pulpit, wild geranium, bloodroot, some wood ferns, arrowwoods. We've only done one rescue, but we are definitely open for that, and especially if any of our park partners are planning to put a new trail in or do some development of the forest, we would definitely be involved in rescuing the plants that might be impacted. So some current open questions. I mentioned a little bit about how far is local, right? We talked about the red maple from Florida probably wouldn't do well in Maine, but what about the red maple from South Jersey going to Hudson, Hudson Valley? How is that close enough? These are open questions. These are areas where we need a lot more research, and there's a lot of debate going on. So how far can and should seeds be moved? So what we're looking at here is we want to preserve the natural genetic pattern of the species. So if we bring genetics from far away that does not already exist in the population that we're planting in, those genetics overwhelm the genetics that were there? And is that a problem because maybe the genetics that were there were really better adapted to that location? And then the other question is, we want to avoid introducing ecotypes that are not well adapted to local conditions. So again, that Florida idea, bringing something that's more adapted to a different climate and trying to introduce that, our restoration might fail because those plants, even though they might grow, they might not do as well as others that were more local. So this is an area of open research. And by keeping the provenance of our seed and our plants, we can react to the latest science and the latest recommendations. This also depends on how far seeds naturally move. If you think about something that's dispersed by ants, it probably moves very little from where it originally grew. But if you think about something that's eaten by the birds, it may move really a long distance before the bird poops it out. So these seed transfer zones may vary based on what species you're talking about. So very complex question. The other open question is, how do we preserve genetic diversity when we are growing the plants and we're collecting the seed? If we only collect the seed from the population at one time, and that seed ripens over a period of time, we may be getting, say we collected at the beginning of the ripening phase, we may be selecting for seed that ripens early. So it's important for us to go back to a population multiple times during the seed ripening phase to make sure that we get the early ripening, the mid ripening, the late ripening, because that's genetic diversity. We also, when we grow our plants, we grow them and they germinate in the first year and we pot those up. Well, what happened to the seeds that didn't germinate? Those seeds were going to germinate maybe the next year or the next year. Those seeds are the ones that have really valuable genetics that delayed the germination. Having that full range of germination, some in year 1, some in year 2, some in year 3, gives a buffer against, variable climate. Suppose they all germinated in 1 year and then you got a drought, would kill them all off. But if you have some seeds that are reserved and they're going to germinate in the next year, that population can still survive. By growing the plants, we are actually selecting for the ones that germinate in 1 year if we don't keep the rest of the soil and the seeds that we sowed. So that's an open question. How do we do that? How do we avoid selecting out that delayed germination? The other one that's a current open question is, what do we do about rare, endangered, and threatened species? And there's two camps here. One camp is, well, let's grow those. Let's get the seed and grow those and spread them around so that they don't have the danger of being extirpated or going extinct. But then there's another camp that says, well, wait a minute. What do you do to the genetics of the local rare population if you're bringing seeds in from elsewhere, and those can then, they can then cross-pollinate? And we also have scientists that are studying the endangered species, like what growing conditions do they need if we're out there planting new populations in maybe marginal conditions for that species, or places that species wouldn't normally grow, we muddy the waters. So there's a lot of debate going on here about what do we do about rare and endangered and threatened species. Do we grow them? Do we not? How do we do it? Are there protocols? You know, so that's a big question. And we know some of the species that are rare and endangered in our area in New York or in New Jersey are really common in the Midwest, and they're in the nursery trade. So, you know, they're already out there and we're already doing them. We're already planting them. Well, how is that affecting things? So open questions. And then our last open question, how do we be more sustainable with our potting soils? So our potting soils mostly have a lot of peat in them. Peat is typically mined from peat bogs. So, you know, here we are trying to do restoration work, and our soil is destroying a peat bog. You know, they're mining it out of a peat bog and destroying a fragile habitat. And we've heard now that peat is a great carbon sink. You know, it holds a lot of the carbon. So we don't want to be disturbing those peat bogs. We want to be leaving them alone. So how can we be more sustainable? What kind of potting soil can we use? There's a lot of investigation going on into this, a lot of investigation into different mixes that can be put together. We've talked about rice hulls and coconut coir as additives to put in to make the soil stretch more so we don't have to use as much peat. But then where does rice hulls come from? We don't grow rice in this area. Now you've got to transport that from somewhere. So you've got transportation costs. Same thing with the coconut. So these are, again, open questions. Where we work. So we work in this area, Dutchess, Putnam, Westchester County, Rockland County, Orange County, and Ulster County. But we also, you'll see that our ecoregions cover northern New Jersey. All three of these ecoregions that we're working in cover northern New Jersey, and we have a lot of volunteers in North Jersey. So we do cover this area. We don't currently have any partners in New Jersey, but we are in discussions to talk with a couple of partners to start working with them. And I just want to show this again. You'll see the big lane here. So we're working in ecoregion 58 and 59. Do we take seed from up here? We're working in ecoregion 67 and 64. Do we take seed from down here? Well, this is another open question with climate change. Maybe we should be taking seed from a little bit further south and bringing it a little bit further north. This is not something we've decided to do yet, but that is another open question. And people are saying, well, maybe this would be a way to make our populations more insulated against the changing climate. That we need more research there on that. So some about my 2023 projects. I talked about Black Rock Forest and Granite Mountain. These are the ones we started with in 2022, and we will continue. When we take on a partner, it's not just a one-year thing. Restoration is a multi-year process. And so when we start partnering with someone, it's assumed that we're going to be doing it for multiple years. Pound Ridge Land Conservancy is a new partner for 2023. We're going to be looking at a couple of sites there, including one site where the beech grove is dying from beech leaf disease. And we're going to be looking at trying to put some understory forest gap species in that area to take up the ground and sort of insulate it against potential invasion by invasive species until some canopy trees can take hold. We're also working with New York State Parks in Farnstock, which is in Putnam County. And what we're going to be doing in Farnstock is doing a restoration in a couple of spots where they have removed Japanese barberry in New England cottontail habitat. New England cottontail is a special concern species. It's not the normal rabbit that we all see in our yards. It's a different species. It's known as sort of a scrub forest rabbit. And they use the forest for cover, but then they go out into the nearby field for forage. So this area of the forest is a dense understory of Japanese barberry. And the problem with that is the rabbits don't do well because they end up with heavy tick loads from the Japanese barberry. So the park managers would like to get rid of the Japanese barberry, but they don't know if they'll be able to do it without impacting the cottontails. So what they did is they made small patches where they removed the Japanese barberry, and they're going to fence those patches in and allow us to do restoration plantings until our plantings get established. Then they'll take the fencing out and they'll study how the cottontail uses that area. And if it's successful, they're going to do more barberry removal and we'll do more restoration. So that's a multi-year project there. We also worked on the Old Croton Aqueduct, and we'll do that again this year. It's a long linear park. As I mentioned, we're in discussion with partners in New Jersey, and you know, if we get an agreement signed there, definitely disperse that information to everybody. So you guys can help restore the forest. And I love this quote by Lily Tomlin. It said, I said somebody should do something about that. And then I realized I am somebody. So we would love to have you work with us. If you're anywhere living anywhere within our region, come volunteer with us. And if you're not within our region, support us. So I love this quote by one of an anonymous volunteer. Look forward to contributing next year. Living with a disability, I don't always get a feeling like I'm making a difference. So I really love this experience. And I just wanted to emphasize that anybody can do this. You know, we had the 6-year-old to approaching 80. There's not a lot of physical strenuous work to, you know, planting is easy, and taking care of plants, potting, going out and looking for restoration projects. So we're open to everybody. And then how you can help. So you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. This is a bit.ly link, bit.ly at subscribe.wwrp, and that's case sensitive. I just found that out this week. And if you don't live near us, you aren't able to volunteer with us, help us out by donating. We are about to approach our 1-year birthday, which is March 14th. And so we're running a fundraiser as part of our birthday. So go on to our website, and you'll see the donation page, and just make us a small donation. It really helps. We don't charge our park partners for anything that we do. So, you know, your donation helps us do more. Follow us on Facebook. share our information with other people that you think may be interested. And I'd just like to close by saying thank you to Elaine for inviting me to give this presentation and share with you information about Wildwoods Restoration Project. And I hope you will join us, and I hope you'll support us and sign up for our monthly newsletter. I just sent out the March newsletter. If you sign up, I'll send you a link to it so that you won't miss that one. All right, let me turn it back to Elaine.
Okay, I am here. Thank you
Okay.
very, very much, Linda. I have heard this talk before, and I'm continually fascinated because when you're talking to Linda, you're talking to a scientist who can explain the open questions in a way that a layperson can understand it. We want to plant some echinacea or something. We want to plant some nice, pretty, native perennials, but we don't always think about the habitat. And it's really important to think about. And what we just learned from this talk is how many, many different considerations there are when you are restoring our woodlands. A lot of people have, the chat is disabled, and I'm sorry about that, but a lot of people have put in to the to the Q&A how much they've enjoyed working with Linda, and I'm one of the people who, my picture was in there, in fact. I was one of the people holding holding some flats of plants. So it's a lot of fun. It's very easy. One person has a very specific question about growing your plants, which I would never have thought of, and he wants to know if he or she wants to know if they can be grown under lights.
We try as much as possible to do what nature would do. Plants can be grown under lights, but we typically don't. I think if you're asking that question, maybe you feel like you don't have enough sun to grow plants for us. And we are doing forest understory plants, so they can take a little bit of shade as long as they're getting a little bit of sun. People do start native plants under lights inside. They start them people are starting them inside now under lights, but then you have to harden them off when you take them back outside. So you sort of gradually introduce them to the harsher temperatures outside, so that they toughen up a little bit before you leave them outside permanently. We typically don't grow under lights because it's expensive as well, because you have to, run electricity and lights and things like that. So it can be done. Yes, we typically just don't. So I guess that's the answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I had 2 flats of plants, and I just put them on a table, and I put that table in the shade. So they did great. So it was pretty easy to do, but they did have to be watered every day, as you said.
Here it says, I see the question, can you grow them under lights? I lack shade. So there's a solution for that. And we have a little frame that you put over the flat that has a shade cloth over it. So you can just put a structure over the top of what you're growing to give it some shade and allow filtered light in. So that, I think she was like,
yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, she explained. Yes. Somebody is interested to know, when you replace the barberry for the eastern cottontails, when you replace the barberry, what are you replacing it with? And I know that would depend on the specific forest type.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start out with some herbaceous plants because we can get those established and grow them fastest, but it should be replaced with shrubs. And in this particular area, it's probably shrubs like witch hazel, lowbush blueberry, huckleberry, mountain laurel, species like that, some of which take a fairly long time to grow. So we're going to be doing some sedges and ferns and forest grasses to start out with, as we develop some and start growing some of those shrub species. And it's like I said, it's a multi-year process. So we're definitely going to be guided by what the natural community should be there. And we see evidence of that in various places. And there's like one little mountain laurel on the side of a hill, and so we can sort of see what it should be.
And again, you look at the trees in place,
Mhm.
which are usually
Yes.
still native. And when you're looking at a forest in our area, somebody is wondering why deer don't eat your new plants. And this is a good one. Yeah.
It is a good one. And that, if you notice what I said, we support parks that are doing some of this management. So our park partners that we have taken on have committed to doing deer management, or they're already doing deer management, and they had fairly low deer populations, or they're putting fencing up around our restoration sites for them to get established. Especially in our area, deer are one of the major problems, and there really has to be something in place to control them in order to even think about doing restoration.
That applies to Linda's property as well, where areas are fenced off. So yeah, when we have our field trip, you'll see that Linda and her husband are also restoring the forest and their property, which is really very interesting to see. We were wondering, somebody would like more information about the founders plots. How big are they? How are they done?
Yeah, so that's another sort of thing that's being developed right now. There's some guidelines that people are following, but there's really not a lot of science behind how big those need to be. They are often several hundred individual plants, but it can also vary by species and how productive of seed an individual plant is on for that species. So there's not a really good question. I mean, not a really good answer. And what I've felt is that founder plots can be relatively small as long as you've got a number of individuals, and you don't want just like 1 or 2 or 3 individuals. You want to have a number so that they can cross-pollinate, and so that you can have some genetic diversity in your founder plot.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. We're getting lots of comments that people like the presentation very much. And also, I do want to point out that it really is a great idea to subscribe to Linda's newsletter, which comes, I think, on the first of the month and is extremely informative. It's very, very well put together, and it gives you lots of information about lots of things that are going on in the area. She lists our talks, and she lists other groups that have relevant talks, as well as just giving a lot of information as about what she's doing. And that was put into, I believe that Melissa.
Yeah, it's on the screen.
It's right here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, on the screen. If you subscribe to the monthly newsletter, if you want to volunteer, subscribe to the monthly newsletter. That's where we're going to announce our events and the registration links for the events. So that's the best way. Once we have our events up, and you'll get a notice in the newsletter.
Okay, I think unless anybody has any, wait a second. I'm sorry. I think we have. Oh, somebody wants to know if the slides will be online. The links are in, scroll up in the Q&A if you want the links. They're all there. The presentation was recorded, and it will be on the Native Plant Society of New Jersey YouTube channel probably within a few days. And actually, I'm going to stop recording right now. Yes.